Good evening, folks. Welcome to tonight's edition of the Parent Forum here at Onward Transitions. I'm Andy Derstine, the clinical director and therapist here, and I'm joined by Jackie Roberts, my fellow therapist, who is in the background working the board. So thank you, Jackie, for joining me tonight. So tonight, and thank you all for your patience. We tried this last week and had some technical difficulties and had to bail, but we're back tonight. Uh, we have an internet technician working here now. So if you lose us, it's because they've disconnected something. Hopefully that will not happen. So tonight we're going to talk about emotional intelligence, what it is, how we utilize it here at Onward, and how you may want to start to incorporate some of this in your conversations with your adult children. So first, a couple of definitions. So emotional intelligence is the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. Another definition, the ability to understand, use, and manage your own emotions in positive ways to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and diffuse conflict. So essentially what emotional intelligence is recognizing and honoring that our emotions are always at play. You know, as much as we want to try and come across as calm and cool-headed, there are still an emotional piece in our communications, and it's important to recognize and honor that, and to be able to utilize it effectively. Um, so this idea of emotional intelligence was first developed in the early 90s, and then a psychologist by the name of Daniel Goleman in 1995 wrote a book, Emotional Intelligence, and the subtitle was "Is EQ more important than IQ?" So EQ is short for emotional intelligence. It's used in the business and corporate world a lot, and many people will make the case that emotional intelligence is a better predictor of success in the business world than intellect. I don't know that there's enough research to really substantiate that, but nonetheless, it really has been recognized as an important component in the way we interact with one another. So there's 5 basic components to emotional intelligence. Jackie, you're going to bring that up on the screen? Okay, thank you. So the first is self-awareness. Having an awareness of my own emotions, my own emotional state, to be able to identify them, to label them, and have an understanding of where they come from. What are the origins of these emotions? Second is self-regulation. So I'm aware of these emotions, and I have strategies and capacities to not let them completely run the show. You know, I'm honoring them, I'm incorporating them in the way I communicate, but I can also regulate and control it to some extent. The third is motivation. I want to utilize these abilities in positive ways. So, you know, a desire to be able to communicate more effectively is an important component. Empathy. You know, there is a sense of I have an understanding of another person's emotions, another person's experiences, and I'm sensitive and compassionate to that. You know, so this isn't like the dark side. I can use all this emotional intelligence to manipulate. That's really not emotional intelligence because it doesn't capture empathy. And then the fifth component is social skills. So, you know, the ability to read the room, to be able to pick up on nonverbal cues, all those sorts of things. So those are the basic components. Now, there are 4 aspects or categories involved in emotional intelligence. And Jackie's bringing up that square or rectangle now. And so the first is, again, self-awareness. And like I said earlier, this is the ability to recognize my own emotions in the moment, to understand sort of my predisposition to experiencing emotions in certain situations. The second part is self-management, and self-regulation. So understanding and effectively utilizing strategies to manage those emotions. If I know I'm going in to a difficult meeting, I might take a walk first. That would be an example of self-regulation, because I know I'm going to be a little stressed, maybe a little anxious, and walking as a base wellness strategy helps to bring that down. The third aspect of this is the social awareness, the other awareness. So being able to recognize and understand emotions in others. And a lot of this is by listening to them from what they're expressing. Sometimes people, in an ideal world, the person we're communicating with is also exercising emotional intelligence. So they're able to communicate their emotions effectively. That's not always the case. So sometimes we have to rely on picking up nonverbal cues, facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, the silences in between questions and responses. And then the relationship management is the fourth part of that. And this is my ability to adjust my interactions and my own mood states so that I'm connecting effectively with another person. And so this is a very fluid kind of process. There's a lot of back and forth between that relationship regulation and self-regulation. And we have to be able to adjust accordingly. So that's effective emotional intelligence. So we're now going to put up just a quick screen of the brain, and this was just to illustrate that our emotions are always at play when we take in information. And information first passes through our brainstem and the primitive part of our brain, the limbic system, where we experience emotions. And the limbic system is powerful. And so we can experience very powerful emotions. And then it makes its way to the prefrontal cortex and the prefrontal lobes, where we exercise more rational, logical thinking. And so it's the interplay between those two that becomes important. In a fight or flight situation, that's the limbic system taking over, and the prefrontal lobes and that logic, rational thinking isn't really at play. But in an ideal world, in less than fight or flight situations, we're able to have an interaction between those two. And when we're able to do that effectively, that's emotional intelligence. So here's a couple of ways we utilize this here at Onward. We have a group every Wednesday on emotional intelligence, where we go through this and ask members to look at ways that they're exercising or not exercising emotional intelligence. And all of this ties pretty well into acceptance and commitment therapy and the matrix that we use. That emotional awareness is more or less the noticing that we talk about with the matrix, and understanding and recognizing the difficult thoughts and feelings is part of that awareness. So we've used this model of emotional intelligence in a number of different ways in groups. One of them is talking about applying for jobs. And so if we start sort of hypothetically with the idea that as I'm applying for jobs and getting ready for an interview, I'm feeling anxious about the job interview. We did this actually in the EQ group yesterday. And, people were able to identify that I might very well be feeling anxiety, nervousness, self-doubt, just anticipation. And so all of those things are important to be able to recognize and to regulate. So the regulation can be things as basic as, don't drink coffee or caffeinated beverages before your interview, so that you're able to sort of maintain your composure better. Go on the workplace website and familiarize yourself with the business so that you have some information and knowledge. Practice with a coach here. Practice job interviews. This is all ways that we self-regulate, and get a good night's sleep. Pay attention to your own self-talk. Are you aware of yourself saying, I'm going to I'm going to blow this interview, and if so, be able to push back on that a little bit. That's part of the self-regulation. Um, and then the social awareness piece of a job interview, could take the form of, really tuning into the interviewer, paying attention to the nonverbal cues, tone, level of enthusiasm. Do they seem to just be going through the motions and asking you the rote questions in the interview? Or are they beginning to take more of a personal interest in you and their affect is brightening up? And you start to get the vibe, to use their term, that this interview is going pretty well. They seem to be interested in it. So then we're back to self-awareness and self-regulation, because you don't want to get yourself overexcited in the interview and, oversell yourself. So there's this interplay back and forth, and, to really continue to self-regulate so that, you're not getting off track or tangential telling stories. You really want to stay focused, but you also want to communicate positive energy and enthusiasm. So that's an example of EQ in a job interview. So, when we talk about the emotional regulation, what I've been emphasizing so far is being able to manage the difficult emotions, to tone down the maybe frustration, anxiety, nervousness, whatever. But the opposite can also be true, that we want to be able to utilize our emotions effectively. So if I'm going into this job interview, I want to pay attention to my emotions, that I'm conveying a can-do attitude, some enthusiasm in the way I present myself emotionally, as opposed to I'm so nervous I can barely talk, or I don't think I'm going to get this job. I'm just going through the motions, whatever that emotion might be behind that, the self-doubt, the resignation, whatever. So the regulating the emotions also includes being able to amplify the positive emotions in a situation. So another situation that we've talked through in group with this would include interactions with friends. I'm frustrated with a friend of mine, and I need to communicate to them. So I recognize that I'm frustrated. I also recognize that I'm nervous, because I know I don't like conflict and I don't want to blow up at the person. And I also know that I can't just keep holding this in, because I have the awareness to know I'm going to blow up if I just let this build and build. So, that's the social awareness. I'm sorry, that's the self-awareness. And then the self-regulation can be pretty similar to job interview kind of self-regulation. I need to really tune into my emotions. I want to convey caring, empathy to this friend of mine. I don't want to just come across as frustrated, even though I am feeling that. At the same time, you want to be authentic in being able to express those emotions. So sometimes we do that just by naming it. I got to let you know when we start this conversation, I'm feeling frustrated. And I just want you to know that, because I care about you, and I don't want to blast you, and I don't mean to be unkind. So sometimes just naming the emotion is a form of self-regulation, so that you're not trying to keep the dam from bursting. So then it becomes this, again, the social awareness of being able to read the other person. Are they receptive to the feedback that I'm giving them? What's their body language like? Are they being open, or are they shutting down and getting defensive? If that's the case, then I know I need to interact with them in a different sort of way, and maybe find a different way of approaching this. If they seem pretty open and said, let's say they said, I realize that you've been upset with me, and I know we need to talk about it, so I'm glad you brought it up. That allows us to then take that information, and now we self-regulate a little differently, because we know we have the connection. We know that we have a good chance of this ending in a positive way. So we're constantly back and forth in self-regulating, other regulating, and finding that balance, and calibrating our responses and our interactions accordingly. So a third one, it has to do with utilizing emotional intelligence in parent-child interactions, parent-adult-child interactions. So, so everybody's involved in this one, right? And so, I'd like you to think about this both from the perspective of a parent, what it's like for you heading into these conversations, these sometimes difficult conversations with your adult children, and also how they're experiencing, because that's the empathy, right? So an awareness that, we've been down this path a whole bunch of times, and a lot of times these conversations don't end well. We end up upset with one another, we're hurt, whatever the emotion is. And so we both have the motivation for it to go differently, to go better. That's that important component of motivation. So, your adult child going into one of these parent calls may very well be feeling anxious, um, feeling defeated, somewhat defensive. I'm worried that my mom and dad are going to be disappointed in me because I dropped a class, or, they're going to be disappointed because I lost the job, whatever it is. So that's kind of their emotional state. From the parent standpoint, I'm going into this call, and I'm experiencing some frustration because, again, I feel like I've been down this path. How many times do we have to talk about this stuff? This is me talking as a parent. But that sense of helplessness, like no matter what we do, we don't seem to have a different outcome, or disappointment, and that can be disappointment in your adult child that we're still struggling with this, but it can also be disappointment in oneself that I just can't seem to find a different way to get through this with them. So sort of that resignation of, going to this call hoping for the best, but expecting the worst. Now, I will also say that many, if not the majority of the calls, people go into it in a very positive, hopeful way. And even though they have some of those concerns and worries, that sense of hopefulness and optimism, that, again, this is the emotional component of the communication, that can really carry the day, and that can help to move towards more of a healing sort of conversation and not getting caught up in the same old stuff. So, as your adult child is going into these calls, and let's say it's a Zoom call, they're looking for the cues. Do mom and dad look relaxed? Is is mom being interested and having an open heart about what we're talking about, or does she sort of have that same pained conversation or pained look on her face that I've known for years? All of this sets the tone for how this is going to go, and it's based on the emotional intelligence. So I want to give you an example from my own experience. This is one of my failed attempts at emotional intelligence with my own children. So I have a 29-year-old son and a 25-year-old daughter. And we have all the similar challenges of raising adolescents in particular that most families have. So I will go into conversations with them that I anticipate are going to be difficult. And often I'm already feeling kind of frustrated with whatever the situation is that we got to deal with. And I'm also aware that they're frustrated. And so I have the awareness, and I actually have the other awareness too, because I understand each other's moods. But my attempt at self-regulation is one that's more of, I need to come across as calm and not reactive. Okay. And so I think I got this down. And I start talking to my kids. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this from them. They will say to me, stop talking like a shrink bot. And in my family, a shrink bot is a shrink robot. So I'm using my shrink voice and talking in this very monotone sort of way because I think I'm managing my emotions effectively by doing this. But what I'm doing is coming across inauthentically because they know I'm frustrated and it's sort of oozing through the conversation. But here I am trying to be Mr. Calm, and it just aggravates them even more. So I'm having the exact opposite effect by attempting to kind of tamp down my emotions and not be genuine about them. So this is another important part of emotional intelligence, is to be authentic and genuine with your emotions. Again, sometimes naming it is the best way to do it. And so we had this conversation in group as well. I said, so, what's your sense? Do other parents besides me, sort of come across in that sort of way that seems like they're not really being authentic with their emotions? And, so I heard from one that says, yeah, my mom goes into business mode. And it's like we're having a business meeting, and she just sort of has an agenda and she wants to get through it. And there isn't a lot of genuine emotional content. Someone else said, I get the lecture and I get the it's more of a one-sided conversation, and I don't feel like they're really listening to me, and to they're not experiencing my emotions. So try and pay attention. This is not a criticism of anybody in particular, but I think as parents we can get stuck in these things. So the takeaway here is don't be a shrink bot with your kids, I guess. So there's lots of different ways that people and our members can utilize this emotional intelligence. Some of it is as basic as recognizing their emotions when they're getting out of bed in the morning. You know, recognizing that I'm feeling kind of down, and I, as a result of that, I want to just sort of stay in bed and do nothing. But this is where the emotional regulation starts to kick in, and I can get myself up. I can take a shower. I can get myself to work, or I can get myself to OT and engage, because I have the experience and the emotional intelligence to know that when I start to do those things, I feel better. So there are lots of ways that this plays out. It, Another example of this that I was reading about was Martin Luther King. So Martin Luther King was able to, one, really effectively harness his emotions to convey his words and his thoughts and his emotions, and at the same time was able to effectively understand the people to which he was speaking, and understand their emotions and empathize with that. So there was that, again, this interplay between his own emotions and regulating those emotions, and being able to convey that to a crowd who was experiencing similar kinds of emotions. So there are many examples of this. The inspirational speakers, maybe inspirational more than motivational speakers. So that probably covers it for this evening. And so I'd encourage you to pay attention to the emotions going on in your conversations with your children. Pay attention to what you're doing before you get on the phone with your adult child. Take some time, take a walk, get yourself sort of mentally and emotionally prepared. Don't just jump out of a Zoom meeting and jump onto the call with your adult children like it's like another business meeting. Take the time to tune into your own emotions, and pay attention to how you're feeling as you go into those meetings. So you'll be better able to regulate and communicate and effectively with your adult children. So thank you for joining us tonight. We will get together again next month. We'll send out a notice with the date. Any questions or comments, feel free to email us and we'll take a look at all of that. So thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for taking care of your kids as well as you all do. Jackie, thank you for running the board tonight. Good night, everybody.